Welcome, friend, to Life and Liberty Radio. I'm David Householder, here to encourage your pursuit of happiness. You and I are partners, exploring our shared spiritual journeys. Together, we're dreaming and working for a free society. Tell others today about our adventure in faith and freedom. So breathe in, open your mind, lift up your spirit. Let's get started. For today's edition, I'd like to talk with you about keeping a Sabbath. Now, I live in California where nobody keeps a Sabbath. We look at the Bible and all the rules and regulations that are in there, and we pick the ones that are the most convenient for us, and we stand for those politically, and we vote for them, even if they don't really even appear explicitly in the Bible. We take them very seriously. But in God's top 10 list, there's something called keeping the Sabbath. So where does the Sabbath come from? Well, the truth is, the Sabbath began way back in creation. The Genesis story talks about God creating the world in 6 periods of time, or 6 days. And it says that he rested on the seventh day. Now, isn't that remarkable? God resting. So like, if we pray to God on the Sabbath, does he still listen? Does he just take the phone off the hook or put it on voicemail? Well, this is the kind of thing we need to look at, because if God takes a Sabbath, if the Creator takes a Sabbath, who are we to say we're too important, we're too busy, we could never pull it off, too many people need me? So what is the Sabbath? Well, according to the tradition of the people who wrote the Old Testament, the Bible, the Hebrews, which are the forerunners of today's Jews, they talk about Friday evening at sunset through Saturday evening at sunset. Friday evening, they light the candles, have a meal, there's songs, there's tradition, and then on the Sabbath, we have to rest. Yes, rest. We really aren't supposed to work. We're supposed to tend to our relationships with one another and tend to our relationship with God and our inner life. Most of us spend very, very little time with our inner life. We're focused almost entirely on the externals of what's going on. We're focused outward, and we don't even know what's inside. Now, we've looked inside a few times, and every time we look inside, we think, whoa, we're bigger on the inside than we are on the outside, and it's bewildering and amazing and vast. And we just as soon keep our eyes on what we can see on the outside. You ever notice when you go back to a place where you grew up as a child and you go on the inside of a building that you used to be familiar with but had forgotten all about, and you recognize every tile in the ceiling and every nick and every mark on the wall? Because that's all been imprinted in us, and we carry with us our whole lives and everything we've seen and everything we've heard, and our interpretations of them. And we've got these pathways of emotions and patterns of thinking and languages and words. Some of us are bilingual and trilingual. We have different parts of our minds that think different things. And yet that self-identity, that golden thread, flows through the whole thing. We know that was us when we were 5 or 6 or 7. To tend to that inner life and to clean it out once in a while and to ask ourselves once a week, what are we doing here? Is a really, really good idea. You can lose a year or a decade in no time if you don't stop once a week and pay attention to what it is that you're doing, to ground yourself spiritually. So the ancient Hebrews, from Friday night to Saturday night, would light candles and put their feet up and connect with each other and connect with their Creator. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a wonderful time to resurrect the idea, to get it going again, to make it happen again. I think it's time to rebirth the Sabbath into our culture. When I was growing up, things would be closed on Sundays. Now, in the Christian church, and nobody's really sure how this happened, there's lots of opinions, but somehow Friday night to Saturday night turned into a focus on Sunday morning and the celebration of the resurrection of Jesus. and we took Sunday as our Sabbath. And if you grew up in a rural area of Europe or the United States, chances are a few decades ago there was very little going on Sundays, and that was a Sabbath for most people. And I would submit to you that it doesn't really matter whether it's Saturday or whether it's Sunday. You see, for me, as a person who works in a church, it's a good idea to take Saturday off because Sunday, it's the busiest day of the week for me. So to call that a rest day just isn't honest. And for me to keep the Sabbath, I can't do it on Sunday. I have to do it on Saturday. If I go back to when I was in graduate school, I kept the Sabbath very seriously because reading was challenging for me because I had to read so many hours every day that I looked forward to Friday night because Friday night I would close my books and that would be it until Saturday night. I think I was the only one at my school in Hyde Park in Chicago that did that. And I got the best grades of my life during those years because I took that time off to think about what it was I was doing, to connect with my young wife, to connect with my friends. We were all young back then, and to form relationships and to discuss what was going on in our lives. I think it's so important to do things like that. And I look at the times in my life where I wasn't as good at keeping the Sabbath. I look at those times and I think, wow, it's just a little frayed. Life was unraveling a little bit. I lacked the direction that I had when I was keeping a Sabbath. You see, the Sabbath isn't just a rule to keep. It's a benefit to embrace. Resting a little bit and relaxing a little bit and having a chance to reflect. Life can be over in no time. It just gallops on. So I would invite you this week, or maybe it's too late to start this week, perhaps next week, to pick a time where you really can take a Sabbath. And my sense is you'll probably have to be a little bit more disciplined than you might think just to get the whole thing going. It's real easy to cheat on something like this, especially during this season of electronics being around us all the time, this ubiquitous sense of there's a screen here and a beeper here and a phone here and an iPad here, and everything's screaming for our attention. And I can't turn that off. I was just talking to a professional recently who was considering doing a Sabbath, and she says, how can I turn my phone off for a day? How can I do that? And I sense the anxiety in her voice. But the truth is, even God can take a day off. So if he can take a day off, we certainly can take a day off. I would invite you to think in terms of how it can be a great benefit to you. We all could use some rest. But then we're going to have to be able to get past the guilt of telling people that we're resting, because we really do put a lot of pride in telling people how busy we are and how much we have to do. It's a way of bragging about ourselves while complaining at the same time. So we're going to continue to explore some practical ways that we can become Sabbath keepers and leave our Sabbath breaking behind. This is your host, David Householder. Say if you're ever in Southern California, we invite you to come and join us personally at Robinwood Church in Huntington Beach. You can find us at robinwoodchurch.com. We're a unique spiritual community with worldwide influence. Come join us. So it's back to the idea of the Sabbath. By now, you're probably already making up excuses as to why you can't do it. I've been there. I have really struggled with this issue for most of my 50 years. And occasionally I have breakthroughs for a period of time where I'm able to keep a Sabbath and life just goes better. And I would invite you to start thinking of ways of overcoming the resistance that you're perhaps already coming up with. First of all, you're going to have things to do around the house. Let's say you work full-time, and you say to yourself, well, I've got a whole bunch of things I have to do. I've got to do my taxes. I've got to do my laundry. I've got to do my garden work. And you might also be thinking, well, I'll be coaching a kid's soccer team, and I'm involved in this, and I'm involved in that, and I've got church stuff coming up, and it's going to fill up the whole weekend, and then I've got evening stuff I have to go to, and I'm working late on this night and that night, and I've got meetings. It's pretty easy to make excuses and fill up the entire week. I think you just have to start by blocking it off. And with my biggest efforts in the last few months, I've only been able to get the Sabbath working for about every other week. And that's being very intentional about it because there are so many cultural pressures keeping it from happening. There's a wedding on a Saturday, and I'm trying to take Saturdays off. And not only do I go to the wedding, I have to actually preside at the wedding. Or some family friends invite us over for a Friday night thing to get to know some people. Or we've got an event we have to be at on a Saturday afternoon. And next thing you know, the Sabbath just starts to melt away like an ice cube in August. And then I get frustrated. I start to beat myself up thinking, hey, here you are talking about the Sabbath, teaching on the Sabbath, and you only keep it half the time. But actually, I think that gives me more credibility. It helps you to understand that I understand how hard this is. This just isn't one of those things you can just throw together and do easily. It's really, really challenging because it's countercultural to keep a Sabbath in the United States, in North America, in Western Europe today, because there is so very much going on. So really, you're going to have to say no to a couple of things. I've said no to a couple of things this past week, and I really don't know how I would have gotten through the weekend had I not done it. It would have been so easy to say yes to those things because we think we might be socially punished if we don't say yes to these things. We think that somehow someone is going to think less of us if we don't say yes to what they ask us to do. Well, I've got some tips for that. It's probably not a great idea to say, well, I'm taking a Sabbath and my resting is more important than what you have to do. And you're asking me to do this. I just want to show that, hey, I'm just going to put my feet up. I'm not going to come. I'm not going to do it. What I often say is this: I'm not too busy, and that doesn't work either. I'm too busy. What you're saying is your busyness is more important than your friend or your coworker. What I like to say is this: I've got promises to keep, and I can't make it. That's one of those things that people rarely push back on. You've got promises to keep. Hey, that's pretty cool. You've got integrity. You've got something that's important to you. And generally, they don't even ask what it is. And if they do, you can have a conversation about the Sabbath and what's wrong with that. So I'm not asking people to get all super religious. I'm not asking people to get all super spiritual. I'm not asking people to get all legalistic on this. I'm asking people to think about God's plan A, the Creator's plan A for our lives. And that's for us to live abundant and full lives. And not say to ourselves week in and week out, I'm working all the time. I don't have time for people. I don't have time to cultivate my interior life. I don't have time for prayer. I don't have time to develop myself. That's just really sad. Because the older you get, the more you realize that life is just breezing by, and we need to just pull over and park on a regular basis, smell the roses, look around, breathe, pay attention, and also to reflect on the week past. I think this is an important part of it. It's not all just kind of lying around. I think it's key to reflect on the week that was. And 1 week, you can really reflect on the whole thing. 2 weeks, it gets to be a bit much memory-wise. But for 1 week, you can say, hey, Tuesday didn't go so well. So why didn't it? How did I approach the day in such a way that it didn't really do what it was supposed to do? And by the end of the day, I was disappointed with what happened. But Wednesday went great. Well, why did Wednesday work well? Perhaps it was because I wasn't living out of anxiety and I was living out of a sense of faith. Perhaps it's because